Somebody said, oh, the shelves are going to be open. Well, maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30, you know? And maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally.
$2 instead of $30. President Trump made a rare admission that his trade war with China will mean fewer goods at higher prices. But for many of his supporters, lots of folks who voted for him, that's all right. Why exactly? Well, my next guest writes this. For the many Americans who are happy right now, Donald Trump's tariffs represent another exciting paradigm shift. The dream of globalism is going by the wayside, Joe Mazzaro, a 29-year-old property manager from Jacksonville, Florida, told me. It might not work, but at least we're trying something. Joining us now, staff writer for The Atlantic, Elaine Godfrey, who authored that piece, and senior writer at The Dispatch, David Drucker. Elaine, I think it's really interesting, that soundbite, or that exchange in particular, this idea that I don't like the status quo, I want to blow it up, I want to try something new. How pervasive is that?
Thanks for having me, Katie. Very pervasive, I would say. Basically, every Trump supporter I talked to varying degrees, was willing to pay a little bit more to bring, as they said, to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., echoing the president's line, echoing the vice president's line that he'll be giving today at the steel plant. There's just this confidence that paying more will make things better. Paying more is worth it to make things better. But there's also just this desire to try something, as you said, to blow something up. I talked to a pollster who does regular monthly focus groups with swing voters, and they couldn't name a single thing, many of them, that Biden had done when he was president. So many of them told this pollster, we just want someone to do something, and we want to hear about it, and we want to, we want to be excited about action happening at the federal government. And I think that those two themes were very pervasive here in my interviews.
David, what do you think folks like that want? Or what do they say they want ultimately? Is it just this idea that we're going to have more steel factories, or, I don't know, make toys here or make phones here? Do they want to see more manufacturing towns? Do they have a concrete idea of what success looks like?
I think it depends, Katie, on who you talk to and what part of the country you are in. Look, for the Midwest and the Rust Belt, there is a sense that free trade agreements, which overall generated so much wealth and progress and productivity for the United States, made so many people wealthier, made their dollar go further, even if they're not among the wealthy. There's a feeling, there's a downside to everything. Nothing is perfect. And for a lot of people in the heartland, they feel like they were left behind by that. So if you're talking to Trump voters, or really any voters in the Midwest, the idea that the president is going to use tariffs to resuscitate manufacturing and force companies or motivate companies to reshore jobs and, high-paying manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. is very appealing, because since the North American Free Trade Agreement was signed during the Clinton administration, they don't feel like they participated in the benefits of that the way other parts of the country did. And then I think, if you talk to other voters, some of this may just be what I discover in every election that I cover, which is partisan rationalization. Meaning you support somebody and you need to find a reason why what they're doing is okay, even if it's going to cause you some problems. And that's not to say that the president's message about reviving American manufacturing and creating more jobs and helping your neighbor by buying local rather than buying from abroad doesn't pull at the heartstrings of Americans. I mean, we saw Joe Biden talk about that all the time, and Democrats were happy to hear it. But I think that when things aren't going well, what we often see in our polarized era, this is not the 80s or the 90s here, but in our polarized era, we see people that are wearing team jerseys finding reasons why it's okay to continue wearing those team jerseys.
Yeah, it is so emotional. And I think that if you just strip out Donald Trump and you just talked about the tariffs on China alone, maybe not as high as they are right now, but this idea of taking less from China, relying less on China, having less junk in the United States, not consuming so much. If you take Donald Trump out of that, Elaine, that doesn't sound like a Republican policy. It sounds much more like, I I mean, I guess a progressive policy. Like somebody, like a mom in Brooklyn might say this. But when you add Donald Trump in, or you add a political party into it, it becomes an emotional reaction depending on how you feel about the person or the party.
That's right. I mean, I think, that makes sense to a lot of us. We all want less junk in our country, right? I think lots of Americans would like to rely less on China for products, to make more stuff here. Like, I don't think that that's necessarily partisan at all. But again, I totally agree that there's jersey wearing going on. People are defending Trump because they have to. They voted for him sometimes 3 times. They have to defend this position. But another thing that they say, though, and perhaps it's because it's less painful to talk about, is their focus on immigration. Like, so many people that I interviewed who still support Trump are mostly weighting that positive evaluation because of immigration. They support these deportations. They support, I think, more than anything, the sort of showmanship of the deportations, I think some would say the cruelty of certain examples here. I talked to all of them about Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Not a single person that I talked to thought that case was a difficult one. Everyone I talked to said that seems fair to me that he's in prison in El Salvador.
But at the same time, David, he is underwater on immigration for the first time. I mean, it's not as glaring as maybe the economic numbers or the approval numbers, but there is a clear majority of Americans who say that he's not. They don't like what he's doing on immigration. They think he's going a little bit too far.
Well, there are concerns that we've started to see in the data about the fact that the president doesn't seem to be concerned about due process, right? A key constitutional right that is usually important to most Americans when you explain it to them. But I think it is true that overall the president is not really suffering because of his immigration policies. There's just a belief that the previous administration simply didn't police the border, allowed illegal immigrants to game the system. It caused a lot of concern about public safety. And remember now, we're not just talking even about the last 4 years. We're talking about the last 20 to 30 years where, eventually in American politics or in state politics, frustrations build up and then, voters react. When I was young in the 80s and 90s, and California voters approved 3 strikes. They approved the death penalty because there was a belief that crime had gotten out of control and that the system wasn't working for law-abiding citizens. So I think the key here where the president has trouble is the economy, because if Joe Biden or any Democrat was saying, hey, it's no big deal if things cost more, we're just going to all have to band together and you don't need as much stuff, Republicans would be rightly outraged and they would call it out. And I'm sure the roles would be reversed.
You really gave me a flashback to my childhood and that 3 strikes law in California. But I think what you're saying, Elaine and David, immigration is such a potent issue. It's such a potent political issue that Donald Trump or anybody who's really going hard at it can get away with a lot more than if they were not. And I will just point to what's been happening in Denmark. They're very tough on immigration in Denmark. But it's the Social Democrats who are winning on that issue. They have had huge success in progressive policy changes, but they are super tough on immigration. All right, Elaine Godfrey, David Drucker, I've got to leave it there. Thank you guys very much.